Well, hey everybody, it's Sandy and welcome back to my channel dedicated to helping you advocate for your own health one topic at a time. So guys, today I want to talk about some of my thoughts on the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine that finally got EUA or emergency use authorization. So just keep watching. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much. I see that there's some new subscribers. I also want to thank people who've been around for a long time. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, but you like the content, I hope you'll consider subscribing and please share with anybody who might find my content helpful. As most of you already know, I don't do like affiliate links on this channel when I'm dealing with things that have to do with people's health, welfare, safety. I don't want to prey on people's fears. I don't want the room for bias that something like a commission would create. So I really would like to grow the channel, and thank you so much in advance, and thank you for those of you who have already helped with that. Yeah, so on to this Johnson & Johnson vaccine. A lot of people are really excited because now we not only have the two that we've already had, we have a third one coming online. Of course, that should help in the effort to get as many people as possible vaccinated in as short a time as possible so that we can just vaccinate our way out of this mess. I think most of us see some light at the end of the tunnel, which has been wonderful. That said, I did have somebody reach out to me just a couple of days ago about a conversation that got started. It was a hypothetical about this Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and it got me thinking, I want to talk about just this narrow aspect of Johnson & Johnson. So some of you who've been watching my channel for a while know that I have some struggles with autoimmune issues. I hate to use the R word and jinx myself, but I do seem to be enjoying some remission at this time, although I'm always incredibly careful. And I have a nuanced view when it comes to vaccines. And one of the issues that I try to be really careful about is avoiding adjuvants. Now, this is not settled science, but there is a credible opinion out there that has won my favor that says that the adjuvants in vaccines, when given to people who have a propensity toward autoimmune disease or already have autoimmune disease, can trigger flares or can aggravate that autoimmunity. So I was waiting not so patiently to find out whether there's an adjuvant in Johnson & Johnson, and I was really thrilled to find out that there's not, because now that it has the EUA, we have access to the ingredient information on the vaccine. And Johnson & Johnson does not have an adjuvant. I thought that was great news for people like me who are concerned about it. But I'm going to walk back my optimism now. And by the way, I think this is a good place for me to insert my usual disclaimer, which is that I'm not giving any individual medical advice on this channel. Nothing that I say should be taken as a substitute for the advice of your own qualified practitioner. So certainly if and when your turn comes up to have a vaccine, you need to have the discussion with your own practitioner as to whether the vaccine that's being offered is a good one for you or whether you should pass and wait for a different one. So I'm just going to be talking about my thoughts. And I have to just say that after reading their data, my enthusiasm has been quite tempered. Well, first of all, I think we all know that we've gotten different numbers when it comes to the Johnson & Johnson, and it's nothing that even holds a candle to the Moderna or the Pfizer's results. So something like 66% effective overall, but 72% in the United States, 100% effective at preventing death and severe disease. So I hear a lot, especially from politicians, when it comes to kind of selling this vaccine and saying it's a great vaccine because it only is one shot and it doesn't have to be frozen, and all those things are true. I think those are great. I don't know about any of you guys, but sometimes it sort of felt like, a car salesman trying to get the lemon off the lot. I didn't hear anybody have to talk this way about Moderna or Pfizer. So that was a cause for concern in my mind about the Johnson & Johnson. And there's no arguing that 66 or even 72 is not as good as 95. But I'm just going to go over some specific points that really concerned me. First, the way they define their endpoints. Anytime you conduct a study, you have to define your endpoints. So if you're looking for severe disease or moderate disease, you have to define what that might mean. The first concern I have is the way they defined moderate disease. Because depending on how you define moderate versus severe disease, you might come out with different percentage effectiveness against severe disease. So in my opinion, the findings in the Johnson & Johnson trials of what was moderate disease would have actually been considered severe in something like the Pfizer or the Moderna trials. So for example, a positive PCR test plus any one of a number of things that included blood clots, evidence of pneumonia, oxygen saturation under 93%, those were all considered in the Johnson & Johnson trials to be moderate. So therefore they could say that they were like 85% effective against severe disease. But in fact, I think most people consider a finding like a blood clot or a 93% oxygen saturation or below to be more severe. So I kind of felt like the Johnson & Johnson coming online and joining the other two vaccines that we've already been using kind of moves the goalpost a little bit. And I wonder if we use the same criteria or the same endpoints that were used in the studying of the two messenger RNA vaccines, I wonder what percent effectiveness we would say we have with Johnson & Johnson. Therefore, the first and my primary concern is the way they measured their endpoints and therefore what they were calling severe versus moderate disease. On a gut level, I wasn't too taken with the notion that it's 100% effective at preventing death. I mean, well, that's kind of a low bar, right? Because first of all, I don't think I'm likely to die anyway if I got COVID. So yeah, 100% effective at preventing death, I would think would be a minimum. Now, the second issue that I have, and by the way, there's an excellent lecture on Dr. Bean's channel about this second point that concerns me. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will send you over there if you're interested in it, because he does a beautiful job of really teaching the science and going through and tweezing apart all the data. There are various cohorts in the study. That means like subgroups of people who were studied with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So there was a cohort of people who have hypertension. There was a cohort of people who have HIV/AIDS. There was a cohort of people who have autoimmune disease or people who are immunosuppressed. All kinds of things, obesity, whatnot. And depending on which of those you're looking at, the effectiveness was not that 72% across the board or 85% at preventing severe disease or, whatever you look at when they say, here's the overall effectiveness. It really varied widely among these different groups. So for example, people with HIV actually did better in the placebo group than in the experimental groups. Now, I didn't see any data on the broader immunocompromised or immunosuppressed other than one very narrow group, and there was not enough people in that group to show any significance. But that does make me wonder, how appropriate is this vaccine for people who are possibly immunosuppressed? Same question when it comes to some overall immune system issue. And so this is something I think would be really important if you fall into this category, to talk with your provider and talk about these numbers as opposed to the overall effectiveness of the vaccine, and talk about this cohort in the study and ask whether this is a really good vaccine for you to take when your number comes up, or should you wait until one of the other ones is available. Hypertension was another cohort that was a little bit concerning. Now, the data looked a little confusing. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. But the bottom line, and what did make sense, is that even where it was working, it looks like it's so much less effective in hypertensives than like the messenger RNA vaccine, based on the data that Johnson & Johnson put out. So, it's one of those things where I think you should talk with your own provider and ask if you fit into any of these cohorts. Obesity was another one. So I'm just going to read off a few of the cohorts that looked concerning to me in the J&J study without getting down in the weeds. If you have concerns based on your own history about the way the cohorts in the study performed, then this is something you want to talk with your own provider about if you are faced with the option of having a vaccine that's going to be the Johnson & Johnson, in my opinion. So HIV infection, immunocompromised, liver disease, that was interesting, obesity, hypertension. Interestingly, people in the cohort with COPD actually performed a little bit better than the overall. So if the overall effectiveness at preventing severe disease was 72% in the United States or something, it was like 79 if you had COPD. So I don't know what that's about. I'm just saying that there are certain cohorts in this study that I don't really hear people talking about. And I wish I heard the FDA addressing that. So instead of wholeheartedly recommending this vaccine, maybe we need to look at subpopulations of people with certain conditions that they bring to the table. Maybe this isn't the best vaccine for everybody. I just feel like I would have more trust in it if I didn't hear just a solid endorsement, but rather a discussion about these findings, because this is the data. This is the published data that Johnson & Johnson submitted. Yeah, so again, if you want an in-depth discussion about each one of those cohorts and its numbers, Dr. Bean did a great in-depth discussion, and I'm going to link his video down in the description box. And finally, I'm just going to segue over to the autoimmune thing again, just because that's always kind of on my radar screen. And so a viewer reached out to me a few days ago and said, hey, now we have our answer. There's no adjuvant. Yay. And, I did feel like that at the beginning, but just based on what I see with the HIV cohort in the study, and I know HIV is not an autoimmune disease, nobody jump all over me because of that, but my issue is that a lot of patients with autoimmune disease are put on immunomodulating drugs or immunosuppressant drugs. So you get some of the same results. And immunosuppression is the issue with HIV. So I personally would approach this vaccine with a lot of trepidation if I were immunosuppressed or immunocompromised for any reason. That's just me. But that would mean HIV, that would mean on an immunosuppressant drug. It could mean any number of things. But since that is all such a muddy area, and a lot of those cohorts were too small to study. I mean, we're talking about clinical trials with what, 40,000 people? You know, how many people are you going to get with each individual kind of an immune or an autoimmune disease? So on that, I'm just going to say what I've already said. I really would urge you to talk with your own qualified provider. If you don't feel like you can have an in-depth discussion of that because you don't feel like your provider has gone to the trouble to read this data or isn't going to read this data for you, then find somebody else. But I think it's really important to not take an overall effectiveness percent when the individual cohorts are so variable. It would be one thing if they said it's overall 95% effective, and in certain groups it's like 88% effective, you know, but we're like all over the board. We've got like 30 something and 70 something, and it's just everywhere. And I think it's really important to get down into the weeds and see which of the cohorts, if any, that you fall into, and make a decision from there based on that, not based on the overall effectiveness of J&J across the board. That's just me. If this were my decision to make, and it's not, by the way, I've got the Moderna already, but I would be having a conversation with my own practitioner if what came up and available to me at my time was the Johnson & Johnson. Now, the good news is I think Johnson & Johnson is a little bit behind on their production. So if it turns out that I'm right and this is something to worry about, and I think if it is, this will get flushed out with some time. It seems to me that just numbers alone dictate that what's going to be the most plentiful in the coming months is going to be the Pfizer and the Moderna, since they're coming out together with something like 200 million doses between the two of them. So that's 100 million people, since each person needs 2 doses of it. And I think J&J is slated in the near future to come out with something like 10 million. So, you know, if this is an issue, I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue. Now, I know some people are going to jump all over me, and kind of rightfully so, because I understand that Johnson & Johnson, if you give this, it's still good for the population at large. We will still get closer to herd immunity if we have this. But you know, when you're the person in question, it's a whole different scenario, right? It's not only society, you're one in one, you're 100% of you. So I do think that we could, since we only have 10 million of these vaccines coming down the road, I think that we could probably put some resource into determining, you know, for whom is this vaccine a good fit? Who is going to get up to like that 72 or even 79% efficacy? And who's more likely to get something like 47? And then maybe we could parse out, you know, for which people this is just not a good option. So those are my thoughts. I just wanted to be real specific and short about it. I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say. I'm really interested in hearing from people who had already contacted me about their concerns with an autoimmune issue. So I'm now over a month past my second shot of the Moderna. I have had no uptick so far in my autoimmune activity at all. I've had a nice remission. Like I said, my fingers are nice and loose and limber, and they have been for some time. And I don't seem to have suffered at all at the hands of the messenger RNA vaccine, so I couldn't be more thrilled about that. Again, I can't overstate how important it is that you have this conversation with somebody who's your own qualified practitioner, but I just wanted to bubble some of this up to the surface because it's been bothering me, especially since I read about Johnson & Johnson's definition of its endpoint for moderate disease, sounding to me to be more severe. I have to say I've lost some sleep over that. All right, so let me know what your thoughts are about that. I really hope that in some months that there will be more conversation, maybe at the FDA and just in society at large, and maybe we'll get down to the bottom of this. Thanks so much for joining me, and until next time, be well. Bye-bye.